MAXX is an absolute demon at attacking on multiple angles. Overrate boost attacks help him race against almost anything, and he has one of the best endgames in Flesh and Blood with his mech suit. Through pregame sideboards, you can lean towards whichever game plan best suits your situation. They need to change the text on this card to say legend because he is more than just a hero. Today we're going to jump into everything you need to know to play him at the highest level. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump straight into a sample deck list here. Alright, so for starters, we have the main 51 cards of the deck. This is like the core of the deck. We're always playing these 51 cards, and then we're siding in additional equipment and 9 additional main deck cards to be able to fill out our deck. And this changes based on whatever strategy we're choosing to pick, right? So before the game starts, our opponent's going to flip their hero, and we need to ask ourselves, are we going to be trying to build the mech, or are we going to be trying to boost our opponent down based on our opponent's hero choice, right? So let's just go over the core 51 cards here first before we dive too deep into that decision or where that decision leads us in our pregame sideboarding. We're starting off with 6 Big Bertha and 6 Crankshaft. I kind of have to explain a little bit of the mech strategy here for this to make any sense. This part here, when this is banished from boosting, put a steam counter on Hyperdriver. That's the only reason we're playing these cards. So if you don't know, in order to make the mech, let's just run through how it works real quick. So you're going to activate a boost card, boost, make a Hyperdriver, don't crank it, pass. Next turn, play a boost card, boost, make a Hyperdriver, don't crank it, pass, right? So then we'll have 2 Hyperdrivers. One has 2 counters on it, one has 1 counter on it. And we can't make another Hyperdriver because if next time we can't make a Hyperdriver unless we boost, and if we boost, we're going to lose the Hyperdriver that has only 1 counter on it, right? So we have to find a way to give that Hyperdriver that has 1 counter on it, we have to find a way to give it 2 counters on it. So one of the easiest ways to do this is by boosting a Big Bertha, boosting a Crankshaft. We also have 3 recharge in the deck. So that's 15 cards in the main deck that give us a way to get the counter on the Hyperdriver. We're never building a mech. We're never going with this game plan unless we think the game is going to go long. And if we think the game is going to go long, finding one of these 15 cards shouldn't be too much of an issue. Oh yeah, so that's why we play these 15 cards. And we also play just overrate boost attacks, right? So yeah, 0 to 60 zipper hit throttle. These cards are just too overrates. They push damage too quickly. And they all block 3. They're pretty much an auto-include in nearly every Mechanologist deck because the numbers on them are just too favorable. We also have a bit of an equipment hate package in here with 6 T-bones and 3 magnetic shockwaves. This could be switched out depending on like what you think the meta is going to look like, what your like pocket local meta looks like. But if you're looking to target any equipment like a Mask of Momentum, right? If you have a lot of Ninja at your locals, this could definitely be worth including. Being able to blow that stuff up is very powerful. If you have a lot of Azalea at your locals, being able to take out their tunics and their Skullbone Cross Wrap. With ninjas, you're taking out their Mask of Momentum and their Tiger Stripe Shuko. So yeah, just kind of play this stuff or swap it in and out as you see fit in your local meta. We also just need 0 cost boost attacks, so blue T-bone or red T-bone fits into that perfectly. Blue T-bone is a great play against Guardian because all of their stuff blocks for 2. So if you're able to resolve a blue T-bone early, you're kind of getting 1 additional value out of it that you shouldn't normally get, which is kind of neat. Pulse Wave Harpoon is just one of the best Mechanologist cards in the game. Not too much explanation needed here. When we are on our mech game plan, we don't always get to resolve the effect of it, but that's okay. It's still a 1 for 4 boost, which is quite good. But when we're on our boost game plan, this card just kind of carries us. When we're not, it's a 1 for 4 boost that blocks 3. So it's good in both game plans. That's why we're always including it. Dive through data as well. 1 for 4 boost that blocks 3. I've already said this is a good stat line. So any additional effect is just kind of icing on the cake. In this case, dive through data has when this hits opt 1. The opting is very powerful. Help us find our Nitro Mechoid. Help us find the way to put a counter on Hyperdriver. Help us find our high octane to combo people down. So yeah, the opt is very relevant in this deck, more so than normal. That's why we're including it. Again, 1 for 4 is the real reason, but opt 1 definitely helps. Twin Drive is very good, helps us dig through our deck with the double boost to find our Big Berthas and our Crankshafts to be able to get more counters on our Hyperdriver. Double boost is also very relevant in combination with high octane, giving us 2 action points off the single card. Allows us to just attack more and more times with our mech. But yeah, this is the default 51 cards. That's why we're playing everything. So yeah, depending on the game plan, depending on what our opponent's playing, we want to be siding things in and switching it up as we see fit. ahead and start with the mech game plan, because I feel like that's the main reason most people want to play this deck, is because it makes a mech, and that's awesome. Who doesn't want to do that? So the 9 cards we're siding in is 3 Construct Nitro Mechoid, 3 High Octane, and 3 Firewall. The Mechoid I don't need to talk about. That's very self-explanatory. High Octane, I'll touch on it. I feel like most people know this. Whenever you boost, gain an action point. That's why we're playing it. The Nitro Mechoid attack, the action to attack, is not once per turn, but it doesn't have go again. So additional action points help us attack additional times with the Nitro Mechoid in the same turn. There are certain matchups that are going to hard try and fatigue us, so we can't just attack with the Mechoid every turn and just try and get the value out of it that way and expect to win. Something like a Bravo could just full commit to fatigue, and if you're just attacking once per turn with your Mechoid, you'll actually lose that game. So the only way to beat something like that, or Uzuri does this as well, the only way to beat something like an Uzuri is to pitch your High Octanes, never attack with your Nitro Mechoid, and at the end of the game you want to like double High Octane or triple High Octane if possible, and then attack 8 times with the mech in the same turn. This happens all the time. It sounds way more convoluted than it is, but if your opponent is trying to fatigue you, you have all the time in the world to set things up, right? So take all the time you need, set this up, and you're going to be hitting for people for 60 in the same turn pretty consistently. And yeah, no one's blocking that out. They're going to be losing that every time. And you're not doing this high octane pitch, deal 60 damage in a turn strategy all the time. That's just against the very slow decks, the very fatiguey decks. You need to set that up. Most of the time, the Nitro Mechoid is just like a tempo play. You're throwing it out there. You're attacking with it every turn for 6. You're blocking with it every turn. It's just too much numbers on the board for your opponent to deal with. And once you get it out on the board, you're pivoting to a more boost-oriented game plan as opposed to a setup one. But you, again, it's just like another skill expression in MAXX. You need to determine, can I boost them down once I get the mech, or once I get the mech, do I have to pivot to a high octane setup type playstyle? And then the firewalls, of course, are just in here because they block for 4. If we're trying to stall the game out, make it go as long as possible, and build our Mechoid and, you know, do our high octane combos, we need some time to set that up. Firewall helps us buy a little bit of time since it blocks for 4. Evo Steel Soul Tower is in here. It's a blue block 3, which is great. And then it's another card in your deck, so it's a little bit harder to fatigue you. And then if you're ever able to get it off, it's an additional attack underneath your Construct Nitro Mechoid. It blocks for 3 and then 2. There's a lot of upside to this card. You know, its ceiling is quite high, and its floor is also quite high in that it's a blue block 3. That most of the time, that's all it's going to be. But if you can resolve it, cool. I don't always side this in. I try to keep it a lean 60 if I can, but sometimes, again, particularly if I feel like they're going to hard commit to fatigue, I'll side it in. Something like an Uzi, I guess. But keep in mind against Uzi is you can't block with this card if they have an unknown card in hand or in arsenal, because if they shred it, it has temper and it'll die. If it dies, the Cogwork base legs underneath it dies. And yeah, if these 2 cards die, then you can't make your mech, obviously. So yeah, just be careful of shred if you're putting in your Evo Steel Soul Tower. For the equipment, we want to always be playing the Cogworks base legs. Because Achilles Accelerator destroys itself to get the action point, we always have to play the base legs. It's the same effect really, but it costs 1 resource. Huge upside in that it doesn't destroy itself though. So this is kind of the leg piece you have to play, unfortunately. When we're looking to activate our Cogworks base legs in the mecha game plan, is the turn we're making our mech, if we could boost, make a hybrid driver, make a mech, and activate cogs in the same turn, which sometimes that happens, like certainly it happens. Not all the time because it's a little bit resource intensive, but it happens probably like 25% of the time I make the mech. If you're able to do that, then on the turn you make your Construct Nitro Mechoid, you'll have 2 action points, then you could attack with it twice on the turn you make it. Huge tempo swing there if you're able to get that off and resolve it. And then sometimes you're just activating it to be able to get an extra plasma pistol swing in. That's more often what I'm using it for. Try to get value out of it the second you see it, because it might not come up again and you might make the mech before you're able to get full value out of it. So even if it's just a pistol swing, get the value out of it ASAP before you transform. If you ever see Evo Steel Soul Tower in people's MAXX decks, it's not because Evo Steel Soul Tower is good. It's because you have to play the base legs, and then Evo Steel Soul Tower is just like incidentally good with the base legs that you're forced to play anyway based on the constrictions of Nitro Mechoid. Yeah, so don't look at this and think like, you're trying to resolve it all the time or anything. You also have to play Galvanic Bender. This is really the only arms piece you can play. While it's under a permanent, that permanent gets +1. Of course, the permanent at hand being Nitro Mechoid, you're going to have, like 8 or 9 attacks with it. So it's going to get like +8 on your attacks, and it blocks for 1. So you're getting like 8 or 9 value out of your arm slot, which is much better than most people are getting. You also have to play Hyper X3 in the head slot. You could just ignore all the text on this card except for at the bottom where it says Mechanologist, and it blocks for 1. Doesn't blow itself up when it blocks, so you kind of have to play it to be able to build your mech, unfortunately. And then for our weapon, when we're trying to build the mech, we're always playing Teklo Plasma Pistol. The reason for this is when we're on our mech game plan, we're playing High Octane. As we know, High Octane combos with the Construct Nitro Mechoid very well. And High Octane also, coincidentally, combos with the Teklo Plasma Pistol. Plasma Pistol also is a resource sink if we ever need it. Say turn 1, turn 0, we draw our Nitro Mechoid. We don't feel like we're going to be able to make it anytime soon, or we know it's going to be a long game and we need to pitch stack our High Octanes. We could just pitch them into the Teklo Plasma Pistol. Even if Teklo Plasma Pistol has a counter on it, you could still activate this action and just use it to start your pitch stack effectively. And I use pitch stack very loosely in this deck. Don't hear that word and think you can't play it. By pitch stack, all I mean is we just want to be pitching our High Octanes until later in the game when we have our Nitro Mechoid already built and we can resolve a couple of High Octanes with a couple of cheap boost cards. So you don't have to like throw this stuff back in your deck in any specific order. Just make sure it's back in your deck at some point. Sometimes in this game plan too, we have to block with 4 cards. Sometimes we have to block with 3 cards, and if we block with 3 cards, sometimes the card we have left doesn't do anything, and maybe we already have an arsenal. So we could just pitch and attack with Teklo Plasma Pistol, which is a luxury we don't have if we were playing with Banksy. Alright, let's move on to the boost game plan. How are we playing it? The core of the deck, the main focus of our boost deck is that everything needs to have go again. Why does everything need to have go again? Because we want to end every single turn with a Banksy swing. Threaten that on hit to keep our hyperdrivers alive. If our hyperdrivers are alive, our cards become better, right? Big Berth is a lot better if we have a hyperdriver. Crankshaft's a lot better if we have a hyperdriver. Recharge is a lot better. Jumpstart's a lot better. Rev Up is a lot better. We need to keep our hyperdrivers alive, and we need to end every turn with a Banksy. Ending every turn with a Banksy also helps us combat fatigue, right? Because we're getting 3 value and not using a card. So we want to end every turn with a Banksy, and because of this, we're not playing maximum velocity, we're not playing payload, we're not playing anything that doesn't have go again, which is a little bit of a constraint on our deck building, but it's a huge benefit because it keeps our deck hyper consistent, right? If all of our stuff is the same cards, it all has go again, it all boosts, every turn we're ending with a Banksy. That's very consistent. Don't try and get too cute with these decks. Try and keep it consistent. Consistency is always king in Flesh and Blood. The 9 cards we're sideboarding in with our boost game plan. 3 Jumpstart, so long as you have a hyperdriver, this is just a red zipper hit. 3 Rev Up, so long as you have a hyperdriver, this is just a red throttle. And then 3 Underloop, 1 for 4 with boost, 3 block. We've already established that that's already a good stat line right there. But this also presents your opponent with an awkward situation in that it has an on hit, goes back to the bottom of your deck. Your opponent's going to think like, can I fatigue him out? If I can, I better block this with 2 cards. Teklo Foundry Heart obviously is the chess piece that we're playing when we go into our boost package. And then for the boots, we're playing Achilles Accelerator. They're just a little bit better Cogworks based legs in that we can get our action point free of charge. We don't need to pay a resource for it. The Arcane Barrier here also sometimes comes up, so that's kind of cool as well. Crown of Providence just has 1 more block and hand filtering over Hyper X3. It's not super necessary. Like if you didn't have Crown, you could just play this whole deck with just Hyper X3. But if you have the sideboard space, and you have access to this card, you might as well play it, but by no means necessary. We're also playing Goliath Gauntlet. We have plenty of 2 attacks. We have our Big Berthas, Crankshafts, Throttles, Rev Ups, Jump Starts. We have plenty of 2 attacks. We're always getting value out of this Goliath Gauntlet. And if we're on our boost game plan, then we want stats on the board. That's kind of like the whole reason we're playing boost, is because we want to deal as much damage, put as many numbers in our opponent's face as we possibly can, and Goliath Gauntlet kind of helps with that. Sometimes when we're on the boost game plan, we'll still play Galvanic Bender because it has that 1 block. So say we're playing against something like 5 that has a lot of 4 break points. Like it has like Bittering Thorns and Mounting Anger, Snatch, right? Maybe we want this extra block. Maybe when we want to block one of their Kodachis and mess up their Mask of Momentum chain links. Galvanic Bender could be sided in, but for the most part, I like Goliath Gauntlet. And then, of course, Banksy. We're always trying to end with Banksy. We've already talked about that. Rev Up is also incidentally a popper for Illusionist, so that's always nice to have more of. All right, so that's the sample deck. I know a lot of people look at this deck and think, why would I ever play this over Dash? I know a lot of people think that because that's what I thought, right? I was like, Max is just worse Dash in every way. Until I started playing him, and I was like, I was a Max hater till I started playing him, and then I realized he actually does a lot of things better than Dash. So I kind of want to sell you on the game plans and what he could do better than Dash real quick. So what is Max doing better? Well, for starters, Max doesn't have to play yellow cards. All of Max's cards are good. They're either blue cards that pitch and block 3, or they are red cards that attack for the most damage possible, right? We don't have to play yellow Zipper Hit. In fact, not only do we not have to play yellow Zipper Hit, but we get to play 6 red Zipper Hits, right? And we get to play 6 red Throttles. So Max's cards, on average, are actually higher numbers than Dash's, weirdly enough. Another advantage to Max is that since we're always looping these hyperdrivers and we're always ending with a Banksy attack, we present an on-hit every turn to our opponent, which Dash doesn't do. And through hyperdrivers, we're able to float resources to the next turn. We could go like Big Bertha, Crankshaft, Twin Drive, Pulse Wave Harpoon, and that's not something that Dash is able to do. She just doesn't have the resources for it. So Max is able to float resources and take advantage of that turn after turn. Dash could do it with Teklo-Core as well, but only for 2 turns and only when she draws a card or a card to get her that card, whereas Max is doing it every turn and making these off of his hero power. His boost game plan also doesn't get hurt almost at all by something like an Arc Smash or Smashing Performance. You're going to lose maybe a Hyperdriver that you made for 2 resources. It's nowhere near as bad as losing your Teklo Pounder or your Induction Chamber. Yeah, so there actually is some solid merit to want to play this over Dash. It actually makes solid sense. This is a better deck in some ways. And I think Max's mech game plan stands up to Dash's slower game plan as well. Her Induction Chamber Plasma Purifier game plan requires a lot of super defensive cards like Favor Seen, Sink Below, Unmovable. And because those cards are in your deck, you can't be boosting because then your boost won't gain go again. Whereas Max has kind of a fluidity, right? He could try and build the mech, and if your opponent's like giving you too much space, you could always pivot and switch back to a boost game plan and kill them before they can. You also get your mech online much quicker than Dash is able to get her items online. So the pressure goes back to your opponent very quickly, right? So if they're in a similar situation, maybe they're playing Dromai or something, where they're also trying to set up a big board and trying to get a lot of moving parts going, you can put the pressure on them much quicker than the Plasma Pistol Dash can. And then final point I want to bring up is while you're building the mech, you can't just block with 4 cards. You have to be throwing damage back at your opponent to be able to make these hyperdrivers and continue forward with your mech game plan. And if you're doing that, they have to, you're going to be throwing damage back at them. They have to be asking themselves if they want to block it or if they want to let the damage go through. If they let the damage go through too much, they're in threat of a high octane plasma pistol combo to kill them. And you don't even need the mech to win. So I think overall, it just is a much more skill expressive game plan. Your paths and your decision trees are much larger in Max because there's so many different ways you could take the matchup turn by turn. And all this flexibility, I think, actually kind of in a lot of ways makes the mech game plan better than the Plasma Pistol game plan. Let me know, do you guys want to see gameplay of this? Would you guys be interested in seeing me play a couple games with the boost game plan and then a couple games with the mech game plan? If that's something that interests you, go ahead, let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe so if I do wind up making that video, you don't want to miss it. But yeah, that's all I really want to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, rate, subscribe, and help the algorithm help me out. Later, gamers.